Welcome to another episode of My Counselor Live here at MyCounselor.Online. I'm Tori, and today I am joined by Melissa, one of our amazing counselors here at MyCounselor.Online. She's been on the show before, and she just brings so much insight, so much wisdom, and I'm really excited to get to spend the next hour with her. So, Melissa, I would love for you to just take a moment, introduce yourself to the people watching who have maybe never seen you before.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. Yeah, hi guys. My name is Melissa Abello, and I'm actually licensed and located in Columbia, Missouri, and I've had the honor to serve here on the MCO team for, I think it's been almost 8 years now.
Wow.
And predominantly work just with couples around marriage sex issues and marriage infidelity and marriage communication. So definitely feel honored and privileged to be able to talk about this today because I've just walked alongside so many different couples that have had to navigate like the challenging waters of this topic specifically. And yeah, I just feel excited to be able to share just some of what I've learned.
That's so awesome. How did you get involved? You know, sex therapy, specifically in like Christian counseling, is kind of a very niche realm, I feel like. How did you kind of get involved into where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it actually birthed out of a few things. One, just working with Josh Spurlock. I mean, he was a licensed Christian sex therapist. And when I came on the team, I just remember thinking like, wow, there's so much I need to learn so that I can be more helpful to couples. And so I definitely think his influenced me to really want to be more effective and helpful in this area. But then also I think just sitting with couples and getting through if they came in for different issues. Let's say they came in because there's just communication challenges, or let's say they came in because they had infidelity issues. Usually there's a sex component to that in almost every situation. And then I obviously had people coming in specifically for help with sex. And so I just thought to myself, like, gosh, I really need to be more equipped here and like dive into this deeper because it's such a great need. For most relationships in general.
Yeah.
This is a part of what God designed for us. So
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think especially in the church Christian counseling realm, that is so needed and important. And so I love the work that you do at MyCounselor.Online. And I'm excited to kind of share it with everybody watching today, because we are going to kind of dive into some of your article and some different questions and different things having to do with that. So we're going to kind of jump in, shift gears into your article. And this is something for those who are watching who are maybe new here. This is what we do every week. We kind of start by talking through one of the articles that this counselor, that Melissa, has written. And so this is an article that she wrote called High Female Sexual Desire When the Wife Wants Sex More. That's hard. That's really hard. I mean, just from the title alone, you're already like, whoa, that's heavy. We're getting heavy real quick. So I want to start by asking you, Melissa, who did you write this article to? You know, is it for the husband, for the wife? And what kind of inspired you to write it?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think when I was writing this in particular, I was thinking about the wives that I've worked with and the husbands too, like just to be able to understand what it's like for the wife to go through this challenge. And so, yeah, I think the different women and wives that I've worked with, I think they come in feeling like, gosh, am I the only one in the world, it feels like, that struggles with this? Because in the world that we live in, usually it's the guys complaining, right? That, man, my wife doesn't want to have sex with me, ... fill in the blank.
Right, and it's almost stereotyped as always being the guy.
And it's incredibly polarizing to women who do have a higher desire in the sexual relationship. It just makes them feel like, well, what's wrong with me that my husband doesn't want to have sex with me like that, you know? And where does this desire come from for me? And so anyways, I think I was just writing to those people that maybe feel like nobody gets it, or that there's not a whole lot of content out there about this, because usually it's about, you know, men that are struggling with higher desire and the female is lower desire. So yeah, I think I was just thinking about them and how hard that is, and just wanting to raise awareness that this is very much a challenge for many women, not just them, and that there's a way to navigate this to help them in their marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. So how common is it really for women to have maybe a higher sexual desire than their husband?
It's a great question. So statistically speaking, we know, and this is hard to really give true statistics because we can't pull every single person, but what we know is that in 10% of marriages, the woman has the higher female sexual desire, which if you think about it, 10 out of 100 people, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot.
Yeah, a lot of women feel like, man, I'm 1 in 100. I'm like the 1%, you know? So there is like probably a higher percentage than a lot of women would even know that is the case.
Yeah. And I mean, can it kind of shift, like throughout, like, could it go from like the husband having that higher desire to the wife, can it kind of shift, or is it just sort of like one has higher always?
Yeah. So I think as far as it changing and shifting, I think it is all relative, that it depends on the couple, right? So I think there's some situations where the female may come in having the higher desire, and then maybe she has a baby. And the postpartum hormones kind of shift her own drive and then maybe make it lower than her husband's. Or maybe something goes on in her husband's life where it takes away a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and he has more space and energy to be able to give sexually. So I think it really does depend on what impacts the sexual desire that both of them have, right?
Right.
And that may or may not fluctuate based on those things.
Yeah, no, for sure. So at the start of your article, you actually mentioned 3 points that you kind of want women to know when they're reading this. So what are those 3 points? Can you kind of emphasize on them?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I share was just that your desire is not dirty. The reason I shared that was just because I think a lot of women feel like, well, am I just some kind of perverted woman that I have this like desire to have sex more than my husband, And I think that's makes them feel like, especially in the Christian world that we live in, there's a lot of like almost, I guess you could say like shame with sexual desire itself. And then you add in, this isn't talked about a whole lot, just makes women feel like there's something wrong with them or that they're dirty or perverted in some way. I think that's the first thing I just mentioned, because I definitely get that sense, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why do I want this so much more than my husband does? This isn't normal. And then I also just wrote in there, like, it doesn't mean that you're not enough for your spouse. And I think another common challenge for women is that we base really, I think sometimes our own desirability on how much our husband wants to engage with us sexually, right? And so if he's not wanting to have sex with us, that starts making us question, like, am I attractive? Why doesn't he want me? If I were skinnier, if I, had bigger breasts, whatever, ... fill in the blank, maybe he would want me, maybe then I would be desirable. And it just makes them question those things a lot and makes them question their desirability. I think the last thing is just that they're not normal, because this is the normal thing for a man, not for a woman. And so,
right. I think the common theme, like the common thread in all of those things is just this like element of shame for women in this situation. Why do you think that there is so much shame around this topic for women?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of times shame comes in silence, right? Or when it's like hidden. So if you think about even in the garden, when Adam and Eve fell into sin, what did they do? They hid, and then God was coming to find them. But I think about how like that's true. Like when things are hidden and this isn't talked about a whole lot, it just produces a lot of shame. And I think if women knew how much other women were struggling with this, or, that somebody else in the room was having a hard time with this, that would actually feel really relieving to them. Like, wow, it's not just me. Maybe I'm not the broken one. Maybe this is normal. Maybe it's not as common as the 9 other women that I might be in the room with, but if I'm in the room with 100 other people, 10 other people in here would be struggling with this. So that would be, I think, huge for them to feel like I'm not broken here, or that there's not something wrong with me because other people can relate to that. So I really think a lot of it has to do with silence about it.
Yeah. And just like opening up the conversation, really just normalizing talking about this, I think is so important, especially in the church, with wives in the church. And you mentioned a few different things that could maybe cause some desire difference. One of the things that you mentioned is relational distress. So, why could relational distress maybe cause that disconnect in sex?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, one of the things that's really significant about sex, right, is that it really makes us feel connected to each other. And when we're disconnected from each other, right, when we have relational challenges, emotionally, maybe we don't feel like the other person cares or understands us for whatever reason, like it makes us not want to engage sexually. And so it's interesting because I've known that to be the case for some men who feel a certain way in their relationship. It just makes them not want to engage with their spouse. Like, I don't want to connect with them in that way. Which I know a lot of situations, I know females feel that way too. Like, if I don't feel loved or connected, I don't want to get in bed with you. Like, I don't want to be connected to you. I think it's the same thing, just flip it around. And I think men can feel that same way as well.
Right. And that kind of goes into my next question, which is that you kind of mentioned that desire disconnect could happen just because of a husband being overly goal oriented. And, does this kind of also go into like for women as well? Could the same thing happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think just this, like, stress, like cortisol, it just has a huge impact on our hormones and on our ability to have energy. And so if we are highly, like stressed and we have a lot of goals and we're running around all the time, like it just has a huge impact on our desire to want to engage in that way and to want to slow down and be present with our spouse sexually. And so, yeah, if their attention's being, and all of that energy is being poured somewhere else, it's going to be hard for them to want to engage in that way. Just
Yeah, I've talked with Josh Spurlock about this before too, because he had an article kind of about sex and busyness and how that can kind of cause issues. And he talked about kind of the same thing, that like when you're overly stimulated and busy and crazy, things are insane, you just don't prioritize it. So going off of all of those things that can cause this desire disconnect, cause shame around sex for the wife, for the husband, all of these different things. When do you know that it's time to seek counseling, to seek professional help for, not just your relationship, but for your sex life? When do you know that that's needed?
I think when you've had this conversation so many times and everything you know to do, right? You go online, you talk to your friends, like you try to talk to your spouse and you're having the same conversation over and over for, let's say, 6 to 9 months, maybe a year. I mean, I would say at that point, if you've exhausted all of your resources, then it might be good to get help at that point, because you could spend the rest of the next 20 years of your life having the same conversation.
Yeah.
And I've actually sat with a lot of people who are in that situation where they're really, really struggling and have been struggling for a long time. And there's just so much loss of time.
Right.
By the time they come to counseling, they're like, man, had I known what I know now, how would our life have been different? Or how would our sex life have been different, really? And how many fights would we have not gotten in? And so I would say when you start feeling like, gosh, we've exhausted everything and I keep banging my head against a wall and nothing's getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a counselor, do you have any practical tips, practical advice for making that sexual relationship a priority?
Yeah, I think if you do have some relational tension going on, right? If there's some challenges going on with things that you're feeling about something that happened a long time ago, you're going to want to really try to work through those issues together, because they tend to pile up over time. And I usually equate this, I think I heard this from somebody at some point somewhere, but I just remember somebody telling me, like, imagine you pour milk on the floor and you don't clean it up. And then the next day you pour something else on the floor, you don't clean it up. And then the next day you pour something else on the floor, you don't clean it up. Eventually the kitchen becomes a place you don't want to be. Like, you don't want to sit, you don't want to be present with each other there. And so I think it really involves like taking a mop and bucket and going back and cleaning those things up, because
Sure.
I think that if we don't clean those things up in our emotional relationship, we're probably not going to want to engage in the kitchen or in the bedroom,
Totally. And it just like piles on each other. I think of like kind of going off of that cleaning analogy, like brushing your hair. If you don't brush your hair and you get all these knots in your hair, it's like, well, yeah, it's going to take a long time to brush it all out because you haven't been brushing it. And, you've ended up with like some dreads and different things that like, are maybe not healthy.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's really hard for couples when they get to that point, because they're like, I just want to burn the kitchen. Like, I just want to get rid of the house.
Yeah.
And they just want to get out of the marriage because it's too overwhelming.
Right.
To think about working through those issues. And I think it's very possible to work through those issues, and you might need a professional, to help you with that. But I think that ultimately when that gets cleaned up, you can enjoy being in each other's presence, and it's not, you don't have all that stuff that's smelly inside or around you anymore, you know?
Yeah.
So
For sure. So, word of advice from you as a counselor to the wives, back to that, wives feeling that shame, feeling that anxiety about maybe having a higher sexual desire than their husband. What advice or encouragement would you give to those wives who are maybe watching this right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things I was going to share earlier was just to think about like having, maybe this doesn't sound maybe super exciting, but to think about maybe even scheduling when you guys are intimate with each other, asking your husbands like, hey, is it possible that we set a schedule, especially if it's because you guys are struggling because your husband is very busy and exhausted and overwhelmed. And the reason for that is if he knows, okay, we're going to be intimate at this time on this day, there's this like energy he can reserve for that time in your guys's day or night, whatever it is. And so I think I would encourage you to maybe just see if that was a possibility for him to be able to set a time. And I know sometimes that doesn't feel exciting, right? Because it's like, well, it's not spontaneous.
That was going to be my question. It's like, what about spontaneity and romance?
Yeah. And I think, the Bible says there's a time for everything, right? Like there's a time for this and there's time for that. And I think there's sometimes seasons in life where spontaneity is not as feasible, right? Because we have lots of kids or we have lots of responsibilities and they're just exhausted. And so if you're in a season right now where that is the case, I would say that it would be okay that you can be spontaneous about what you do in the bedroom, but maybe just not the time, and that you just look at spontaneity a little bit differently. And that you can still be spontaneous about what you do, but maybe just the time you do it is different. Yeah. And so I would say that. And then I would also just say that if you really are struggling with these things as well, just to really try to identify, like, what am I feeling about this? Like, what does this make me feel about myself? Am I feeling like I'm really alone in this? Am I feeling like I'm broken? I'm feeling like my husband doesn't think I'm enough. And that's why he doesn't want to have sex with me. Like, just to start, because sometimes like we don't really even know what's bothering us about this. We just know it doesn't feel good. And sometimes just understanding what's underneath the pain that you're experiencing and being able to put a name to it can then help you to understand, okay, what now do I need to be able to address with my husband or within me to help me to feel like I can be at peace with me or at peace with him? And what could I do or what could he do to make this better? And so I think like doing a little bit of a self-assessment of like, what is bothering me about this? And like, what do I need based on what's bothering me regarding that? So
yeah, no, that's good. That's really good advice. And, like you said before, I feel like every woman at some point maybe has felt this, maybe has felt a little bit like, ooh, I feel like I have a higher sexual desire than he does. What's wrong with me? Maybe he doesn't want me. I feel like we've all had that experience and just shame around even just talking about it. And so I love that you are normalizing the conversation, Melissa, and really like bringing us in to talk about it. And hopefully there are wives who are watching this, who are listening to this, who are encouraged that it doesn't have to be like this forever, that you're not stuck,
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope so too. I really do feel like I've actually taught quite a few different classes and seminars, and this is one of the things that a lot of women come up to me with. They like, hey, what about high female sexual desire? Like, what about us? Like.
Yeah. And so then I go back to like when you talked about the statistics, I'm like, there's probably so many more who don't talk about it.
Yes, it's so true. And so I definitely feel like, gosh, those women are like, and I don't know if you're watching this and you're feeling that way, but these women are really wanting help. Like they want resources and there's not a whole lot out there. And yeah, I just want to encourage you that if you're seeking help or you're seeking input, that there is help, that there is a way to work through this, both internally and with your spouse. And being able to figure out those desire differences is not easy. And yeah, just that I would love to be helpful. Somebody on our team would love to be helpful to you guys as you walk alongside in this like challenging and also like kind of polarizing journey.
Yeah, so good. Oh, I love it. Okay, well, we're going to kind of jump into kind of the next segment of our My Counselor Live episode. I always feel like there needs to be like a jingle for this. So
Yeah.
this is our trending topics, and I always feel like we need like a trending topics type of thing that goes on in this episode, because this is kind of a really fun little piece, a little segment where we get to talk about what people are Googling, what people are researching, what people have questions about. And so we're going to kind of steer away from sex talk for just a few minutes. We'll come back to it. But we're going to talk about personality tests. We're going to talk specifically about Myers-Briggs, personality tests, you know, the Enneagram, all of these things that people are always researching, right? People are always Googling, you know, about themselves, like, who am I? What is my purpose? You know, all of these different things. So we're going to jump in and talk about that. So I want to start by asking you, you know, what are personality tests, and what's kind of your thoughts around them, Melissa?
Yeah, sure. I would love to talk about this. I know one of the big personality tests right now is the Enneagram. Myers-Briggs is a big one. I think those are probably the most two popular, well-known ones. And really, personality tests are just ways to categorize our understanding of our personality, what we like, what we don't like,
Right.
and what makes us
Which
compatible.
can be super helpful.
Yes, it definitely can. Like, there's this categorical way of us understanding and measuring different things that we might be like drawn towards or excited about. And I definitely think that it's one of those things that can be used as a great tool for understanding ourselves and understanding others. Like, I think it's a great tool, right?
Yeah.
I think when it becomes something that's not used as a tool, right, but it's something that's used to like not help us, but maybe it hurts us in some way, like it makes us feel invalidated, or it makes us feel misunderstood, or it makes us feel put in a box by other people, or we start putting other people in a box, like, hey, they're an Enneagram 8 and this is who they are, and so, you know, they probably are going to do this and they probably are going to do that, which some of those things might be true, but that when we start,
we almost use it as like a way to judge.
yes, exactly. I think that's when it stops becoming a tool to help us and it starts becoming something that we use against. Or does that make sense? And so I think we just have to be careful how we use it. It's supposed to be a tool that helps us understand each other better. And when it stops becoming that, it's not useful anymore to us.
For sure. So, okay, I do have a question, Melissa. Do you know your Myers-Briggs or your Enneagram type? I'm curious because I love personality tests just for the purpose of understanding myself better and understanding the world better and my people better. So, do you know kind of your types?
I do. And it's really interesting because I've done the Myers-Briggs personality test probably like 10 times, and it feels like I fluctuate between like 2 or 3 different ones.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so with you. I feel like it can change depending on the life season.
Yeah, and I've noticed that about the Myers-Briggs one more, that like I have fluctuated more in that specific test. And to be totally honest with you, Tori, I don't even remember which one I am right now. Because it feels like those letters are so much more complicated to me. There's so many different nuances to the Myers-Briggs test. But as far as the Enneagram test, I do know mine, and I think it's a 2-wing 1.
Yes.
So yeah, so which is kind of interesting, just being a therapist and working at MyCounselor. I could see how maybe that part of my personality works well. And
yeah, no, that's super awesome. I will say, last time I took the test, which it has changed so much. I remember being testing really high extroverted, basically until I was about 16. And then it just kind of went downhill. And now I'm very introverted. And so it was like, I watched the, you know, cause it says the percentages, you know, I watched the percentage just go down the more that I experienced life, and was like, I don't want to be around people quite as much as I used to be, like at the end of the day. And so,
with you.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I am an INFJ on Myers-Briggs, and I am an Enneagram 4 wing 3. Yes, but my husband is an Enneagram 2 wing 3. So he's kind of the other wing. You guys are a bird, you can fly. So
yes,
love it. Love that. That's awesome. So, okay. You mentioned how they could maybe be not so helpful. Maybe could you emphasize on that? Have you seen that? Or, you know, what even maybe tips do you have for not letting it kind of become your whole identity, and other people's identity to you?
Yeah, I would say that I think the ways that it's not helpful that I've seen is that I think that there's a lot of assumptions made, kind of similar to what we were saying. Like when we make assumptions, then we don't actually try to understand the person that we're in front of. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, it could be helpful in understanding them more. But if the person that you're talking to or the person you're close to that you're navigating this with, I think it can become something that feels like a disconnect if you can't engage them and you just assume that, okay, because they're a 2, then they're going to do this and that and this and that, instead of being like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Why did you do that? Like, instead of being curious, we become critical or we become assumptive about them based on whatever it is that we see that they score, you know?
Right. And personality tests, you know, they don't take into account life experiences and seasons and heartache. And, you know, you just never know how you're going to react when, you know, you're in a trauma or grieving or something. You know, it doesn't take that into account necessarily. It's just, you know, telling you a little bit more about your personality.
Yeah, it's just something, it's a tool to help us. It's not like the gospel about who we are. Right. So I think when we make that who we are, then that's where we get like gridlocked, you know, and we start making assumptions about ourselves and other people, or maybe it's even used to justify our behavior. Like,
oh my gosh, I have seen that so many times, because I do feel like the Enneagram, specifically in like my generation, and I feel like in the past, you know, 5 to 10 years, has become a big thing. And I see it so much even in like, you know, college students saying like, well, I'm an Enneagram 7, so I can, you know, do this. And it's like, what? Like if anything, you know, personality tests, things like Myers-Briggs, like the Enneagram, I feel like can be used to help us grow, not to justify, you know, unhealthy behavior.
Exactly. And I think that's also where it's dangerous too, is it's like, and I kind of like, there's different parts of the Enneagram where I think it says like, these are the unhealthy things, these are the healthy like, ways that this shows up. But I think it's dangerous when we're like pigeonhole ourselves into that place where we're like, well, I'm this, so I'm just that way, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, I see that in my own, you know, I'm a 4, and, you know, stereotypes of 4s are that they're very emotional, very dramatic, kind of cry a lot. Won't say it's not true. I do cry a lot. I am pretty emotional, but it can be one of those things where like I'll cry during a movie and, you know, a friend will be like, well, she's a 4. And then it kind of feels invalidating. Like, well, wasn't that a sad movie? Like,
yeah, why can't I just be a human that was sad about that movie? You know, and it's not like, because I'm this, that's why I'm this. And I think that's where it can be invalidating, right? When we like do that. I think when it becomes something, it's not helpful to understand ourselves, and we're using it in other ways, because that's why it was designed. It was for understanding.
Right. And for growth, you know, to heal
and for growth. Yeah, exactly. And so, so I think when we're like, well, this is just who I am, and there's things about us that we want to grow in or change, like it can make us feel like, well, I'm never going to change, or I don't have to change, you know, in these different ways. And I feel like that just that now is working against us. The tool is no longer.
Yeah. No, I even think of Myers-Briggs and like what we were saying, that, you know, our types have kind of fluctuated over the years and through different experiences and all of these things. I mean, you're not stuck, right? Like you're not like, that is not your end all be all identity. Our identity is in Jesus, right? Exactly. So like if we're placing our identity in a personality test that we took online, we're doing life wrong. Like
exactly. Yeah, I think it's where we put our weight. Exactly. Like if we over-identify with those things and we don't identify with Christ and who he wants us to be.
Right. Yeah, because that should be the goal, right? Is like being sanctified. It's not necessarily like growing into our personality. It's being sanctified to be more like Jesus.
Exactly. Yeah.
So good. Hopefully, you know, this was pretty cool information for people watching, but hey, if you're watching this and you want to share with us maybe like who you know, kind of see yourself as on the Myers-Briggs or in the Enneagram, feel free to comment. You know, it's awesome to talk about. It's awesome to like learn and grow into, you know, being more like Jesus, you know, when we're not like placing all of our identity in this one number or series of letters. But definitely comment below if you guys know your type, want to maybe share with us. It helps us get to know you guys a little bit better too. And but thank you for that. Awesome, Melissa. Love it. Love our little trending topic. So we're going to jump in to our last little section of the episode, which is the part where you, the viewers, the listeners, get to be involved. So this is where you send in your questions and we get to sit down and talk through them. This is one of the best parts of our weekly episodes for My Counselor Live, is really getting to interact with y'all in this way. So if we are answering some questions and you guys think of some along the way, feel free to comment them, inbox them to us, send it on MyCounselor.Online/ask, and we will definitely be answering it in a future episode. But we're going to jump into kind of our first question. And we're kind of going back to sex talk a little bit, Melissa, after that little break, because you are so skilled and you understand so much around sex therapy. And so we are going to kind of answer a few questions people have sent in around that topic. So the first one comes from a wife who says, my husband had an addiction to porn for 20 years, and I believe his low testosterone was caused by it. What do you think?
His low testosterone was caused by that. That's very interesting. I would have to know more probably to accurately assess that. And I'm curious kind of where the linkage that maybe the wife is making to that. But I could see maybe that I would say that, most all pornography issues have to do with intimacy challenges, right? Not necessarily with physical intimacy, but with emotional intimacy. People who struggle with porn or with sexual addiction in nature, it usually is stemming from this feeling of I can't be close to anybody. I can't really be known. And this feeling of because I'm unlovable or because I'm not desirable, to somebody else, if they really knew me, they wouldn't really love me. I have to escape, in some way, shape, or form. And porn definitely kind of feeds that feeling of I'm desirable, I'm loved, especially to a man, and especially with the porn industry and how they try to play on that specifically to men. Even with how they have women looking into the camera during that, it's almost alluring. I want you, you're desirable, you're worthy of this, or of me. That somehow in the brain starts shifting that, okay, this is what makes me feel that way. This is what makes me experience that. And then they go over there. And so I would be cautious to say that maybe low testosterone would cause that, because it's so characterized by challenges with intimacy. Could it play a role? Potentially, for sure. And so I just don't know for sure the specific reasoning why she's asking that, but I do know what usually causes and exacerbates pornography addictions, and usually that's what it is. And so I would be more curious about those things.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great answer, because I do think that, more information might be needed to really assess the situation. But I think at the end of the day, we do know that an addiction to pornography for that many years can cause kind of an emotional disconnect when it comes to sex. And so that is something that, we can kind of say, but beyond that, it's just sort of something, maybe to talk about with your spouse, or talk about in counseling, and just kind of sort out together.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe the question about low testosterone, I don't know what this person feels, but sometimes when we can quantifiably put something on something that's caused us so much pain, there's relief that comes with that. And so if that person is asking that question specifically because they're I just need to know and understand why this happened and why this has been so painful, I would understand why you would just be searching for answers in every area of your husband's life.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, I think about that even outside of sex therapy and struggles with sexual intimacy, just trying to validate it with something, something that makes it, make sense or feel better for us, or whatever that might be. So I definitely appreciate the vulnerability of the question, and definitely hope that whoever asked this question is able to seek that help and really restore that relationship with their husband. So we're going to jump into this next question, kind of continuing on with our sex therapy theme. So Melissa, this person said, my partner denies me sex for up to a month or more. What do I do? And this question was asked by a female, which I thought was interesting. And I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah. Gosh, what do I do? I would be curious about the dynamic of the relationship itself, and if the husband and wife are feeling connected, right, emotionally, if they're really disconnected, if they have any challenges in their relationship. So I want to encourage you to ask yourself, like, are we struggling in other areas of our marriage outside of sex? And have we tried to address those things? So I would encourage you, if you haven't addressed those things, to try to address those things. I would also be wanting to ask him, like, hey, honey, is there a reason why this is the case? Like, to be curious about that. Oftentimes, right, if for a female who's like feeling this, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of insecurity there. And sometimes that insecurity can just come out as, why don't you have sex with me? What's wrong with me? You know, and it's hard then for the spouse to really share, what am I actually feeling? Why is this hard, you know, for me? So I just want to be curious about that with him. Like, honey, what is going on? You know, are you really stressed out? Sometimes there is some other issues going on. There might be, I don't know if your husband is struggling with erectile dysfunction, because sometimes that makes men want to avoid sex because they just feel embarrassed. Like, when I try to have an erection, like, it doesn't happen. And so it's just too much pressure. So I'm just going to avoid it altogether. Right. So there could be a myriad of different reasons why he's avoiding that. And I would want to be curious about that with him and try.
Right. Yeah, no, this question could go back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, you know, your article on a wife wanting sex more than her husband. I mean, and it could just kind of go back to that desire too. But I definitely would be curious, you know, what kind of is the root issue of why he's denying her sex for up to a month or more.
Yeah, and it could be other reasons that we have. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why that could be happening. And so it's hard to say for sure. So I'd want to be curious if he was unwilling to explore that. I would be curious if he would be willing to go to counseling and talk about it in a place maybe where he felt like he could talk about it, or there would be help or something like that. So
for sure. Everyone needs counseling. Literally everyone. Like, let's just put it out there. Like,
I know.
Whether you're struggling with sex or you're just struggling in your relationship or just have unresolved trauma on your own, like, we all need to talk to somebody. So definitely feel like that is like the main thing here is like, we need to talk to someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like, if we're getting gridlocked, but maybe they haven't asked those questions and so they can't get the answers, and maybe the answers are there if it's that simple, you know, like because sometimes it's as simple as asking, like, honey, what are you feeling? What's going on?
Yeah.
But if you've tried that already and that's not working, you know, and you're feeling stuck, I don't think it would hurt to try to explore going to see a professional to see if somebody could help you guys navigate that topic.
For sure.
So
yeah. Oh, so good. Awesome. That's great. Good answer. So on to the next question, which is very heavy and interesting. And I'm super curious about your thoughts on this, Melissa. This person said, can you talk about fantasy, specifically around abuse during sex, and how we can stop that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard, I think, because it's not uncommon for our brains to bring up past trauma intrusively in those moments because it's so, I mean, sex brings up so much. It just takes us back to those places, whether it's like things that we're doing during sex that reminds us of trauma, previous trauma, that then makes us go to those places in our minds and in our heads. But yeah, I would say that it would be important to understand like how to navigate like intrusive thoughts, because I think the first thing that happens with fantasy is sometimes it just comes in and it's intrusive, like something that maybe, you know, comes up and we're thinking about, like, it just comes out of nowhere. And then it's like becomes enticing, right, for us to continue to think about it more because it relates to what we know, even if it wasn't healthy or good for us. And so I think it's important to like know how to disengage that. And I think the way that you can do that is just to recognize like, okay, I'm having an intrusive thought right now about this, right? And then to figure out, okay, how can I then redirect my thoughts to the present? with my husband or with my wife right now? How can I focus on what I'm feeling in my body, what they're doing? Just really grounding in the present. Really, that's all it's doing, is I'm grounding. Like, what am I seeing? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing in my body as I'm with the person that I'm with right now? So just noticing it and then redirecting that attention to your body.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that that is a great answer, because I do think that trauma can play such a big role in the sexual relationship between a husband and a wife. You know, if your first exposure to sex and to these things was unhealthy and was not the way that it's designed to be, I mean, it can definitely come up, you know, for years if you don't talk about it, if you don't, you know, practice these things, this mindfulness. It can just be a really, really difficult thing to go through as a couple.
Yeah. And I think it's challenging because I think like our brains associate pleasure or arousal sometimes with those things because we experienced arousal during those things for the first time. And so they're just like married to each other. Arousal and excitement is around these things, even if they were hurtful or painful. It's because
Is there a way to like ever get past that?
Well, yeah, I think the amazing thing is when we start disengaging that part of our brain, right, that says that's what's exciting, that's what's arousing, right? I think one thing is just being able to talk about it because it's sometimes so shameful, and part of what can like continue that cycle is the shame, you know, it's like we just go back into it because it's something that feels good at the moment, but that makes us feel ashamed, which then we don't talk about it. And then it fuels maybe us doing it again. And so I think talking about it is helpful, but then also like when we do redirect that and like draw our attention to our body, it actually develops a new pathway for pleasure in our brain. Which then now we have two different choices, right? We have this one over here, which we've experienced before, and then we have a new one. And the more we then redirect to that path, the more lanes it starts developing and the bigger of a highway it becomes, so that arousal then can go that way instead of this way. But it would be natural, right, that we would go that way originally or want to go that way because that's what we know. That's what our brain knows. And that's how it pairs pleasure, you know, with arousal or even with orgasm potentially. And so, yeah. And I think just knowing that that's even possible and how to do that can be hugely freeing for people because they just feel so stuck in that, you know, and feel so shameful about it. Like, why would I fantasize about something that was so painful for me? Or why would I go there and do that, you know, when it's so painful?
Right.
So,
and I'm curious about the other side of it too, because I'm not 100% sure, you know, where the question is coming from, but, you know, what if, you know, it's the other partner who wants to like it to feel, you know, aggressive or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, how do you navigate that? You know, maybe having come from trauma or something like that.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I would say that there's like probably two different ways that people struggle with this. Like we see this like dynamic of like, maybe I just want to be more aggressive during sex, which then can trigger somebody with trauma, right? If the person who was perpetrating, which normally is the case, was aggressive with me. And so in that case, I would say that it would be important for you guys to have conversation about what you feel good and what you don't feel good about, and to have a word, maybe a safe word, that when you start feeling unsafe or when you start feeling like, oh, this is too much, or I can't do this, you're just starting to notice your body shutting down, to have a safe word where you say whatever that safe word is. And then your spouse knows, okay, that means I need to disengage right here, right now. I need to slow down. I need to check in. How are you doing, honey? What do you need? And so I think it's really important to have that communication between the two. And sometimes in the moment, it's really hard for the person who's experienced trauma to say stop, or to say, please slow down, or to say, I feel uncomfortable. And so having that safe word makes them feel empowered, that like, okay, I don't have to explain all these things. They just need to know I don't feel good. And that's hugely relieving for them. And then the other part that I think is more probably unhealthy for the spouse is when it has to do with some sort of control. Because there is this idea of like, I'm sure we've all heard of it, but BDSM, where there's like an element of control, right, involved, and like harm involved during those things, which are hugely re-traumatizing, I think, for anybody who's experienced trauma. And isn't honestly helpful, because sex was never supposed to be about control. It was supposed to be about intimacy. And so if that were happening, right, then I would want to have a conversation or I would want the couple to have a conversation about, hey, why are we engaging these parts during sex? Because that adrenaline rush that we're looking for during sex isn't actually the chemical, right, of adrenaline doesn't actually help the other chemical that goes on in our bodies during sex, which is oxytocin. It actually lessens the oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding chemical in our bodies. And so if this isn't about us bonding and connecting, and this is about some sort of high adrenaline rush, then this is no longer about us. So anyways, I would just encourage people to maybe even explore and understand like what's going on in our brains and why we're chasing that control in the sexual realm for pleasure.
Yeah, no, that's good. Hopefully that encourages whoever, asked this question for sure. And that kind of concludes our time together. But Melissa, I just so appreciate your heart for these conversations, for normalizing these conversations that we've had today, and really just getting really deep with it, right? Like just going right in, not kind of like dodging around the questions. And hopefully the people watching, the people listening could be encouraged in this conversation today that we got to have. So I just really appreciate you being here. And if you have maybe a word of encouragement, something you'd like to leave with our listeners, with our viewers, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're listening to this and you're watching this, I just want to say that I respect you for seeking wisdom, seeking help in some way, shape, or form. I think we're all in a place of learning in life. And I just respect you for being in a place of humility to want to grow and learn in these different areas that maybe we were talking about today. And that's, just that I hope that you can have some hope from this conversation that we had today, that maybe there's possibility for something to be different, or for God to be able to heal in different ways that maybe you're hurting. And so, I think that's what I would say to everybody listening today.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. Well, thank you, Melissa, for just giving us your time today and sitting down with us and talking about some hard things, some great things. I've just appreciated it a lot. So you guys, that kind of ends the episode for this week, but we will be back next week for another episode with another counselor for My Counselor Live. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And like I said, if you think of any questions, if you have any questions you'd like answered in a future episode, feel free to inbox those to us or ask them on MyCounselor.Online/ask. And we will see you next week for another episode. Have a great day, everybody.